Welcome, adventurers, to your introduction to the Follies of Novus Aurum, a homebrew setting for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Novus Aurum, the Glittering City, or sometimes called the Double or Nothing City, is a glitzy Art Deco Metropolis taking inspiration from the Roaring Twenties, Bioshock, Magic the Gathering's New Capenna, and just a pinch of film noir. It is a city of exciting potential, of contrasts, of the haves and have-nots, and the widening gap between the two. This is the first of a series of 6 to 8 short videos, as I have a lot to cover. There is the history of the city, the 8 families, 8 custom subclasses, and a few other goodies like monsters, items, and the double or nothing mechanic. This video is going to cover the history of the city itself, and while I will be mentioning the 8 families when they become relevant, we'll be going much more in depth with each of them in subsequent videos. So, stay tuned for that. A final disclaimer, this is all a work in progress. I've been playing and DMing Pathfinder since the 1st edition, but this is my first proper attempt at designing such a dense homebrew setting. The actual PDF of the rules and all the information will be coming much later. I just wanted to create these videos as sort of a primer. To begin, let me introduce you to arguably the most important character, the city itself, Novus Aurum. And to talk about Novus Aurum, we need to talk about what came before, the Old City. Its proper name has long since been forgotten, as 200 years ago, the Old City was utterly destroyed when something fell from the sky. This disaster came to be known as the Skyfall Catastrophe, and not only did it sunder the city and sink a significant portion of the island, it left no survivors. If they were lucky, nearby ships were able to bear witness to the impact and the pillar of fire and smoke that followed. The unlucky ones were pelted by a shower of stone and battered by shockwave-induced waves. To give you a picture of what this did to the island, let me say that it went from a roughly circular island to a crescent moon shape, 3/5 of the landmass just gone. After about a week, some of the surviving fishermen decided to summon their courage and tried to go ashore to see what was left of the city. By the time they found somewhere where they could make landfall, nothing remained of the once great city but smoldering piles of rubble. Tentatively walking through the ruins, taking in the absolute devastation, the fishermen were filled with both awe and dread. Strangely, they never came across any bodies, not one. Don't worry about it. However, something curious was found amongst the rubble. Strange, crystalline shards, warm to the touch, were scattered across the ruins, and while the fishermen lacked the magical knowledge to understand what they had found, they knew it was valuable. These fishermen, a family known as the Nocelli, decided to seize the opportunity this discovery offered them, and packed up as many of these strange shards as they could, and took them back out to their boats. This move would utterly change the destinies of these simple fishermen and their descendants, but we will cover them more later. Upon returning to the mainland with their discovery, word of what had been found quickly spread, and in short order, scholars, alchemists, and all manner of arcane practitioners were clamoring for even the smallest fragment of these shards. In addition, the fact that the fishermen had visited the island and returned to tell the tale did not go unnoticed. Soon, multiple expeditions had been launched to the island to comb through the ruins, not just for the shards, but to search for some clue as to what had happened, and of course, for valuables. This influx of eager bodies became what would be later known as the First Rush. A quick, important sidebar. While no survivors, or bodies, were ever found on the island, not everyone who lived on the island had been there on the day of the catastrophe. Some had been among the fishermen who had had a front row seat to the disaster and survived. Others had been traveling and only found out what happened days or even weeks later. And I bring this up because after the initial shock and despair wore off, some did make their way back to the island. These individuals would actually go on to band together and even form one of the 8 families, the Argonrath, but I will continue their story in a later video. But back to the bigger picture. Not only did the expeditions find more of the shards, everyday items from the ruins were occasionally found to have been somehow transmuted entirely into the same crystalline material. Goblets, swords, and personal ornaments, there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to what had been changed and what had been not. Some scholars were very puzzled by this, but many others were just happy to have large shards to work with. It did not take long for the researchers to realize that even the smallest of these shards seemed to contain powerful elemental energies. Theories were abound regarding what the shards were and where they had come from. Some thought the object that had crashed down from the heavens was a gigantic elemental shard itself, and the smallest fragments had broken off upon impact. Others suggested the incredible impact had unleashed strange energies that had conjured the shards from thin air, or pulled them straight from the elemental planes. Lots of speculation, no solid answers. Academia, I'm telling you. Permanent research camps were soon set up to harvest and study the shards. And all the while, more and more explorers were arriving. Not just explorers, though, but those who saw opportunity in other ways. The researchers needed strong, skilled workers, after all, to sift through the rubble, to construct living quarters and workshops. They needed meals prepared, clothes cleaned, and as the expedition ground on, the occasional creature comfort. One of the big draws as well was that this ruined island was a sort of clean slate for the people who journeyed there. No centuries-old ruling dynasties, no ancient territorial or family feuds. This place was a fresh start, a future you could craft with your own hands and hard work. And this was appealing to a lot of people. In less than a year, after enough rubble had been cleared, a small permanent settlement was established to house the researchers and those who had come to support them. Focused as they were on their research, the naming of the settlement seemingly fell to the laborers, who eventually dubbed their little town Rubbleport. It had storehouses, docks, an inn, and permanent homes for many of the researchers, laborers, and other various support workers. Not long after Rubbleport was given its name, the first outbreak of what came to be known as dust fever hit the town. It was eventually determined this illness was caused by breathing in tiny shard particulates, and the symptoms from long-term exposure could range from a debilitating fever to, in rare cases, delirious psychosis. Think temporary elemental energy-infused plague zombies. They weren't so much interested in eating you or your brains and just beating you senseless with their fists. Not contagious, though. Small comfort. Thankfully, few cases got that far, but the few incidents left quite an impression on the small community. This prompted a call to the mainland for an increased trained medical presence on the island, and in short order, a dedicated cadre of healers and priests arrived and established a permanent clinic. Strict rules were put into place after that regarding working with the shards. Because stopping the research was out of the question, you see, as the study of the shards was becoming fruitful, finally, beyond what the researchers could have anticipated. Though their initial devices were crude, the researchers found small elemental shards could be used as power sources or as magical foci. Around 2 years after Rubbleport's official founding, an explosion of practical applications for the elemental shards began. Construction projects began incorporating shard-powered equipment, and productivity began to increase at an astonishing rate. This led to what became called the Second Rush, as calls for more workers and more support staff went out. Eager for the work offered, scores of new settlers arrived, and Rubbleport began to swell, as more homes, more workshops, more inns were constructed in quick succession. This was the start of the rapid advancement that the city would be famed for. This prosperity was not without growing pains, so to speak. A number of incidents marked this period of rapid expansion and advancement. This included the rather dramatic formal creation of several of what would become the 8 families, either out of necessity or as a response to others being founded. Some families were created, in fact, as direct opposition to others. As the city grew and became more complex, so did its politics. Another notable event occurred about a decade after Rubbleport's founding. To the consternation of the growing population, dust fever reared its ugly head again. This second dust fever outbreak was more serious, but really is more significant in how it affected the Icarus family, so I'll be covering it more when I talk about them. Let's just say the citizens of the Glittering City now are very careful about any sort of elemental shard particles in their food or water. All safety regulations are written in blood, after all. Despite these and other growing pains, the city continued to expand at an astonishing rate. About 50 years after the official founding of Rubbleport, a decision was made to rename the growing city. To mark the occasion, the families came together to sponsor the most impressive construction project to date, a monolithic city hall capped in a gleaming brass dome. Many names for the structure were put forward, but eventually it was dubbed the Bell Hall. This was chosen as a reminder of the bell that had been rung to signal meals back when the city had been a collection of tents, and everyone had taken meals together under one roof. It was hoped that this callback to the early days of a tighter, more cooperative community would foster greater unity in the city. Jury is still out on how that played out. But with the Bell Hall's completion, the city's new name was announced as well, Novus Aurum. And fast forward another 149 years of prosperity and expansion. It brings us to the current era. Rubbleport and its dusty streets are long gone. Now the brass-plated high-rises of Novus Aurum reach for the sun. The families are now heavily entrenched, interwoven with the very fabric of the city and its structures. The bicentennial is just around the corner, and for many, the city seems to be reaching a tipping point. A couple notable events that occurred in those 149 years, lightning round style. An ancient dragon showed up, and rather than laying waste to the city, she opened a casino. Warned by a prophetic dream, the city guard ambushed a force of would-be raiders and sank their fleet. It was discovered that waters directly above the impact crater are a magical dead zone, and a floating clockwork prison was built over it called the Last Raft. The first city bank was completed and almost immediately became haunted. A baby sphinx was found washed up on shore, grew up in the city, and is now the chief librarian of the university. A growing movement of sewer druids has begun engaging in acts of eco-terrorism to protest the shrinking green spaces in the city. And this is where I am going to dive into what I call the current vibe, which is potentially more important than all this history, at least for the games you want to run in Novus Aurum. Because the history is helpful for context, and the families fill in the city with NPCs and give you story hooks and possible motivations, but the vibe sets the tone. The city unquestionably looks awe-inspiring from the street level. Bustling, well-dressed crowds walking to and fro between towering buildings of glittering glass and metal. But beneath the hustle and bustle, something fundamental has changed in the city. Novus Aurum has been defined for so much of its history as a place where people could come and start a new life and achieve great success if they put in the effort. The real immigrant ideal, so to speak. But as the city nears its bicentennial, things have changed. After over a century of growth and consolidating their positions, practically everything in the city is owned or is tied to one or more of the families. Their wealth and influence are so great and widespread, it has forced many of the regular citizens to acknowledge a hard truth. They are no longer the masters of their own fate. Their hard work, their brilliance, all serve one or more of the families, even if they can't trace the strings. Any citizen at any time could have their entire lives uprooted or destroyed, by a power play made by some family executive who doesn't even know their name. There's a desperate energy in the streets now, a nervous hunger to find a corner of the city you can call your own before the grip of the families becomes as immutable to the city as the setting of the sun. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is now clearer than it's ever been, and also bigger than it's ever been. And that is killing the spirit of many people, and is making some angry. In dark places, away from the glittering light reflected off the glass and the brass, bitter voices are gathering and starting to scheme. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. This is the first time I've tried a video like this, and I have been writing and rewriting this script for weeks, so it feels great to finally get it done. The next few videos will be dedicated to the 8 families. I'm really looking forward to those. I will be detailing their personal histories, notable locations tied to them, and the unique subclass that is associated with them. First on the block will be the eternal rivals, the Nacelli and the Babelos. If you want to be alerted to when the next video is released, like and subscribe, and most importantly, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will try and address any comments in the next video. So, thank you all for watching, and until next time, may all your hits be crits, and all your rolls be golden. Bye!